She was not born to beg. She was born to rule. Her family was slaughtered in a single night. The ring was cut from her finger while she still screamed. She has been no one for 4 years. Dirt, silence, survival. Then a king comes to the tribute block. He breathes, he stills, he looks, and the question that could end her life echoes across the square. What is that scent? The morning they sold her, the sky was the color of old bone. Marisol had learned to notice skies. It was one of the few things that cost nothing. The tilt of her head upward, the inventory of cloud and pale light, and it kept some small, stubborn piece of her from going completely hollow. She catalogued skies the way she used to catalog the stars with her mother, lying on the warm stone of the East Tower, tracing constellations with a pointed finger, while her mother called them by their old names. Before, she did not think the word before in full anymore. She had learned to stop at the edge of it, the way you stop at the edge of a drop in the dark. The tribute lot was assembled in the lower market square of Veth, which had once been a city of fountains, and had been a city of silence ever since Lord Casimir Vale took the throne 9 years ago, by putting a blade through the old king's throat at a feast. Now, the fountains ran with brackish water, and the city smelled of fear, sharp, acrid, the scent of people who had been frightened so long they'd stopped recognizing it as fear and simply called it air. Marisol stood in the 3rd row of the lot. She had positioned herself there deliberately, as she positioned herself deliberately in every situation she could not escape. Not at the front, where the buyers examined merchandise. Not at the back, where they herded the unwanted. The middle, average, unremarkable. She had spent 4 years becoming the human equivalent of a doorstep, something people stepped over without registering. She was good at it now. Better than she had ever been at anything she'd been trained for. The old dances, the 6 languages, the way to hold a fork at a formal table. All of that had been peeled away, layer by layer, first by grief, and then by the specific discipline of survival. She looked like a slave, that was the point. Her hair was bound in a rough cloth at the nape of her neck, brown strands threaded with the grime of 3 weeks' travel in an enclosed cart. Her hands were calloused. She had worked at that, at roughening them, grinding them deliberately against stone in the early weeks when they still looked like a girl who'd never done labor. They did not look like that now. Her dress was the drab undyed wool issued to tribute lots, shapeless and identical to the dress of every woman on either side of her. She had nothing that caught the eye. The scar on her left ring finger, where the signet had been cut free, she kept folded inside her fist. The tribute master, a narrow man named Pelth, who sweat regardless of temperature, was speaking to the assembled buyers with the mechanical patter of a man who had said the same words so many times they had ceased to be language. Marisol did not listen. She tracked the crowd instead. The wealthy merchants, the estate administrators for absent lords, the minor nobility who arrived in clusters and spoke among themselves, pretending they weren't here for what they were here for. She tracked the exits. She tracked the guards at each exit. She tracked the distance from where she stood to the gap between the 3rd and 4th pillar on the market square's eastern wall, where she had noticed yesterday a loose stone that had been replaced incorrectly, and left a shadow that might, if she were very small and very fast, allow a body to slip through. She had mapped every city she'd passed through in the last 4 years. She had never needed the map. Not because she'd been safe. She had not been safe for 4 consecutive hours in 4 years, but because she had been very careful and very quiet, and she had been no one, and no one does not warrant an exit. She was still mapping when the horses arrived. Not the merchants' horses. Those she'd heard, the thick plod of cart horses, the jingle of merchant tack, the whole soft commercial thunder of ordinary buyers arriving for ordinary business. These horses were different. They moved too quietly. That was the first thing. She felt it before she heard it. A slight shift in the air pressure of the square, the way sound settles when something very large enters a space and fills it. Then the hoofbeats, low and spaced, the rhythm of animals that had been trained to move at the pace of something deliberate. She did not look. The buyer's block had a protocol: heads down until called. Looking up before you were addressed was a punishable impertinence, and Marisol had learned to treat protocol as friend. Protocol meant predictability. Predictability meant invisible. She held the line of her gaze at the packed earth of the square, the dusty boots of the woman to her left, a beetle making unhurried progress between cobblestones. She breathed through her mouth, a habit she'd developed in enclosed spaces when the scent of unwashed bodies and fear became too dense to breathe through the nose. She heard the tribute master's voice change pitch. Not volume. He didn't raise it. But something compressed in it, a kind of controlled breathlessness, the way a man speaks when he is trying to appear unimpressed in front of someone who impresses him deeply. "My Lord Alpha King," Pelth said. "We are honored." Marisol's hands tightened inside her fists. The Alpha King of Veth's occupied territories had been Brannock Verath for 6 years. She knew his name. She knew it the way everyone in the conquered territories knew his name. Not as personal knowledge, but as atmospheric fact. Like knowing the name of the season or the name of the law. He had come down from the northern pack 6 years ago, when Casimir Vale had made the mistake of raiding Verath territory for silver and slaves, and had discovered that the northern Alpha responded to insult differently than the soft-handed southern lords. Casimir was accustomed to punishing. The war had lasted 11 months. When it ended, Casimir still held his stolen throne, but Brannock Verath held everything north of the Kelrath River, which was 2/3 of the kingdom. And the tribute system was Casimir's concession, the annual price for Brannock not crossing the river with his full pack. Everyone in the tribute lot knew why an Alpha King attended these sales personally. They thought they knew. Anyway. Marisol thought she knew. She had cataloged what she knew. Kings bought the best of tribute lots for prestige, for service, for the specific display of power that came from owning the choicest things. She had planned, accordingly, to be not the best. To be average. She had made herself average with 4 years' careful practice. She heard the footsteps. Not the tribute master's quick shuffle. Not the buyer's wandering tread. These were slow. Even. The footfall of a man who moved like he had never needed to hurry, because the world rearranged itself in advance of his arrival. Booted, she registered, and heavy. He was large. The footsteps came down the line of the tribute lot at an unhurried pace. And she kept her gaze down, and she breathed through her mouth, and she thought, "Not me. Look at anyone else. I am a doorstep. I am the ground." He stopped. She felt it as temperature change first, a proximity of warmth, close enough that she could feel the difference in the air before she registered it as a person. He was tall. Standing this close to her, his presence reduced the gray light reaching her downturned eyes. She breathed, involuntarily, through her nose, and immediately wished she hadn't. He smelled like pine resin and cold water and something beneath both of those. Something animal and clean and deeply, biologically alarming. A scent that did not translate into language, that bypassed the thinking part of her mind entirely and went directly to the part of her that was older than thought. She had never smelled anything like it. She had smelled fear and grief and blood and unwashed bodies and the mildew of carts and the iron scent of chains, and before all of that, she had smelled her mother's rose oil and the clean wool of her father's riding cloak, and the sweetbread that came from the palace kitchens on winter mornings. And none of those things, none of them, had made her body respond like this, a low, involuntary tremor, a sudden, sharp awareness of every point on her skin, her pulse-shifting rhythm. She clenched her jaw. Don't. He had not moved. He was still standing directly in front of her. She could see his boots. Fine leather, dark, no ornamentation. The boots of a man who wore quality as utility rather than display. She could see the hem of a traveling cloak, heavy and road-dusted. She looked at the boots and thought, look at anyone else, anyone in this row. She heard him breathe in, slow, deliberate, the way a predator scents an enclosed space. Stop, he said. She did not know for a half-second if he was speaking to her. The tribute master made a strangled sound that resolved itself into an obsequious scramble of footsteps. My lord? This one. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Not a shout, not a command in the political register. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't need volume because nothing in the world would dream of not listening to it. Separate her from the lot. Her heart dropped through her chest. Not me. But Pelth was already speaking, already moving, already reaching for her arm with damp, proprietary fingers. Of course, my lord, certainly. This one. Yes. She let herself be moved. Because panicking now would be visible, and visible was the one thing she could not be. She let them walk her 3 paces out of line, into the open space at the side of the tribute block, and she kept her gaze down, and she breathed through her mouth again, and she thought about the loose stone in the eastern wall. She heard him follow. He stopped in front of her again. This close, with no row of bodies to diffuse it, his scent was... She breathed through her teeth and thought about nothing. She thought about cobblestones. She counted cobblestones. Look up, he said. She looked up. She had made a study of not reacting to things. It was the discipline that had kept her alive. She had watched Casimir Vale execute her father's loyal steward in the palace courtyard at the age of 20, 3 days after the usurpation, and she had watched it without making a sound, and she had considered that the hardest thing she would ever do. She had not yet met Brannock Varath's eyes. He was not what she'd assembled from rumor. The rumors had given her a warlord's brutality in a warlord's face. Scarred, coarse, the particular ugliness of men who were powerful enough to stop caring how they looked. What she found instead was a face that was hard in its architecture, but not in its surface. A long jaw, a broken nose that had healed slightly left of center, dark eyes set deep under a brow that, this was the thing that undid her cataloging instinct for a full second, was bisected by a scar that ran clean through his left eyebrow. A thin white line that pulled the outer edge of it fractionally upward, giving his resting expression a quality that was not quite a question and not quite amusement, but lived somewhere in the space between. He was younger than 34 felt in the telling. He looked like a man who had put his 30s to significant use. He was looking at her the way he had scented the air. Like a man reading something. Like a man who could not quite believe what he was reading. She kept her face still. She was very good at keeping her face still. She had been keeping her face still for 4 years. What is your name? He asked. Saul, she said, a diminution. A nobody's fragment. Not Marisol, which was too distinctive. Not the full thing which no one in this life had spoken aloud since the night her family burned. Just Saul. A syllable. Saul, he repeated. He said it without inflection, but something happened to his eyes. A brief compression, like a man pressing on a bruise to find its edges. How long have you been in tribute service? 18 months, my lord. A lie. Carefully maintained, integrated into her documentation at the cost of 3 carefully saved coins to a tribute registry clerk in a city 200 miles east. In the registry, she was Saul of no house, no family, a debt-bonded girl who had entered voluntary service to pay a father's debt. A nobody from a nowhere. He looked at her left hand. She had not unclenched her fist. Her hands were at her sides, fingers curled loosely, the scar folded inside. But something in his gaze had traveled there with such precision that her whole body went cold. He knew. He couldn't know. No one could know. The ring had been gone for 4 years. The scar had long since scarred over, had been roughened deliberately alongside the rest of her hands, so it was just one callus among classes. He couldn't possibly. Open your hand, he said, soft, almost gentle, the kind of voice that had learned not to need edges. She did not move. I'm not going to harm you. He said it the same way, the same quiet. Open your hand. She thought about the loose stone. She thought about the gap in the eastern wall. She thought about what discovery meant, what it had always meant, why she had spent 4 years being a doorsteps. Because the alternative was this moment, this exact moment, standing in front of someone who could scent a lineage and holding in her closed fist the last visible evidence of who she was. She opened her hand. The scar lay across the base of her ring finger, pinkish white, the clean oval mark of a signet ring's pressure, and then the rougher line where the blade had gone. In the 18 months that her registry claimed she'd been in service, a scar like this would have faded to almost nothing. This one hadn't, because it hadn't been 18 months. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at her face. She met his eyes and thought, run. She thought it the way she always thought it. Categorically, inventorially, the exit mapping part of her mind cataloging angles and distances. But her body did not move, and she could not entirely explain why. It was partly the certainty that she wouldn't make it. It was partly the fact that his 2 guards had shifted position at the edge of her periphery, flanking. Very professionally. The moment he'd separated her from the lot. But it was also, and this was the part she could not explain and therefore tried to set aside. It was also the fact that his eyes, looking at her scar, had done something she had not expected. They had gone soft. Not the softness of pity, not the calculating softness of someone assembling a strategy. Something quieter, something she had no category for in her current vocabulary, which was the vocabulary of a woman who had been carefully preparing to survive for 4 years, and had forgotten most of the other words. He closed her hand. Gently. His fingers wrapped around hers and closed her fist for her, covering the scar, and then he released her and stepped back. I'm taking this one, he said, not to her. To Pelth, who was hovering at a respectful and terrified distance. Add her to my manifest. Of course, my lord, at once should I. The rest of the lot as well. Pelth's sweating intensified. All of them, my lord? I said what I said. Marisol stood in the pale morning light and breathed and tried to understand what was happening. She was very good at understanding what was happening. It was the other skill she'd developed. Alongside invisibility, the reading of situations, the rapid assembly of disparate information into a coherent picture of danger. She read this. A king had bought her. A king who could scent a lie and had chosen to close her fist around her secret instead of prying it open in public. A king who had, for reasons she did not have enough information to explain, bought the entire tribute lot. None of this assembled into any picture she had encountered before. She didn't trust it. She filed it next to the loose stone in the eastern wall and kept it there. The journey north took 4 days by covered wagon, which was not comfortable and was significantly more comfortable than the cart Marisol had spent 3 weeks in before reaching Veth, the tribute lot. 16 people in total, ranging from a man old enough to be her grandfather to a boy who couldn't have been more than 15, rode in 2 wagons with clean straw bedding and were given food at every stop. Not elaborate food, but consistent food and enough of it, which was a thing that Marisol registered with the particular sharp attention of someone who had sometimes gone 4 days without consistent food and had learned to notice its presence the way others noticed its absence. She did not speak to anyone. She sat at the forward end of the wagon, back against the slats, knees drawn up, and watched the landscape shift from Veth's gray plains to the greener, hillier country north of the Kelrath. She noted every town they passed, every fork in the road, every stand of trees large enough to offer cover. She was mapping, because she could not stop mapping. It was as involuntary as breathing now. On the second day, the boy, the young one, 15 or near enough, sat down near her. He had the specific courage of someone who hadn't yet learned that caution was the better option. He had dark, serious eyes and a bruise along his jaws that was yellowing to green at its edges. Do you know where they're taking us? He asked. She considered him. Vareth Keep, the northern hold. What happens there? I don't know, she said, which was true. Her intelligence about Brannock Varath was thorough on facts, his territorial holdings, his pack structure, his military record, and thin on character. What she had was contradictory. The northern wolf lords called him iron. The southern merchants who traded in his territories called him fair, which was a word that got used rarely enough in this world that she didn't know what to do with it. The boy was quiet for a moment. My name's Corvin. She looked at him, thought about it. Saul, she said. He nodded, accepting the syllable without pressing it, which raised him slightly in her estimation. He had a thin silver chain around his wrist that had been overlooked in the tribute intake. It must have been under his sleeve, and he kept touching it with his other hand, the way people touch things that mean their old lives. She looked away. On the fourth day, the wagons climbed. Vareth Keep emerged from the tree line the way old things emerge from old forests. Slowly, first as a suggestion in the stone of the hillside, then as a wall, then as walls, then as a whole enormous structure that had the look of something that had grown rather than been built. It was nothing like the palace she had grown up in. That had been white stone and open arcades, terraced gardens falling to the sea, a building that announced its own beauty the way a person who has always been admired announces theirs. With ease, without trying. This was different. This was dark northern granite, narrow windows, towers like arms raised against the sky. It was built to hold rather than to welcome. She noted, immediately, that the gate was large and the approach was open, and the walls were heavily gardened at their base, which was odd. She'd expected military barrenness. Instead, there were kitchen beds, ordered rows of winter cabbage and leek and herb, and two women in practical aprons moving among them without haste. The wagons stopped in the inner courtyard. The keep's staff came out to meet them. A broad woman of 50-some years, who moved with the authority of someone who had run this household for a long time and intended to run it until she decided not to. She had iron-gray hair and the look of someone who had seen many tribute wagons arrive and formed opinions about each of them. "I'm Dagmar," she said to the lot, without preamble. "You'll follow me. You'll be shown to the east wing. There are baths. Use them. Clothes will be provided. After that, food. After food, sleep. Tomorrow you'll meet with the steward about placement." She paused, looked around the group. Her gaze settled briefly on Marisol, who was standing toward the back with the practiced self-erasure of 4 years' discipline. Dagmar's eyes did not linger, which Marisol noted as a data point, without understanding it yet. Questions? No one spoke. Marisol did not speak. She followed. The east wing was not opulent and was not a cell. It was somewhere in between those things. Clean, stone, warm with fires that someone had clearly built in advance of their arrival. The baths were communal. Large stone basins. Steams rising. Soap that smelled of something herbal she couldn't immediately identify. She bathed quickly, efficiently, as she did everything now, and dressed in the clothes that had been laid out. Wool again, but fine wool this time, undyed but soft. The kind of thing a household servant might wear who was valued for their work. She found herself in a small room off the main corridor, alone, for the first time in 3 weeks. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and breathed. She allowed herself, in the quiet, to be afraid. She gave herself 3 full minutes of it, a concession she'd developed early in her years of this, when she'd understood that if she never allowed the fear any air, it would eventually consume her from the inside. 3 minutes. She sat with it. The king had looked at her scar. The king had scented something. The king had, and this was the thing her mind kept returning to, the thing that didn't fit any map she'd made. The king had closed her hand. The 3 minutes ended. She put the fear back in its sealed place. She looked at the room. The door had no lock on the outside. That was unusual for tribute housing. She checked it 3 times, running her fingers along the frame in the habit of a woman who had long since stopped trusting apparent kindness. No lock, no external bolt. The door opened from inside and outside alike, which meant the thing keeping her in the room was only her own willingness to stay. She was still processing that when someone knocked. "A moment," she called. Because some reflexes are older than survival, the door opened. Not Dagmar, not a guard. Brannock Vereth filled the doorway in a way that was less about his height, though he was tall, taller than she'd registered in the market square's open air. And more about the simple fact of his presence, which was the presence of a man who had never in his life needed to make himself larger to fill a space. He wore no cloak now, no travel wear. A plain dark tunic unlaced at the throat by one tie, sleeves pushed to the forearm. He looked, she found, to her specific irritation, more dangerous in domestic clothing than he had in his travel coat, as if the removal of armor revealed that the armor had been unnecessary all along. He held a small eating knife in his right hand. She was on her feet before she registered moving. "Sit down," he said. "It's not for you." He held it out to her, hilt first. "It's yours." She looked at the knife. It was plain, well-made, the kind of blade that was genuinely useful for cutting food, and could, in an emergency, be useful for other things. Nothing decorative, nothing symbolic. "I don't," she started. "All the household carries one," he said. "Dagmar will give you yours in the morning with the rest of your things, but He paused. The pause lasted long enough that she noticed it. "I thought you'd sleep better with it tonight." She did not move for a moment. She was very good at reading traps. She had been reading traps since she was 20 years old. She read this: a powerful man, alone, a closed door behind him, a knife he claimed to be giving as a gift. Every prior calculation she had ran the same algorithm. What is the price? Nothing was given. Nothing had been given in 4 years. Kindness was a mechanism. She had survived partly by knowing that. She reached out and took the knife. Its weight settled into her hand. Solid, real, the hilt warm from his grip. Her fingers wrapped around it. Her knuckles were white. "If you raise that at my throat in the night," he said, without particular alarm, "I'll assume you have a reason." She looked up at his face. He said it simply. The way he said most things. Without theater, without the performance of a man making a grand gesture. He said it as if it were simply true. If she wanted to use it, she could, and he would consider her reasons. She could not categorize this. She tried. She failed. She sat back down on the edge of the bed with the knife in her hand and her heart going sideways in her chest. He turned to leave. "Why did you buy the whole lot?" she asked. She hadn't meant to ask it. It came out of her the way things come out when the guard goes down for 1 second, involuntary, too revealing. She pressed her lips together. He paused in the doorway. "Because the alternative," he said, without turning around, was leaving them there. He left. The door closed. She sat in the firelit room for a long time after that, knife in her hand, the smell of pine resin and cold water still hanging in the air where he'd been, and she thought about the word alternative and what it implied. And she went to sleep with her back to the wall, and the knife under her hand, and something she had no name, for working its way loose in the places where she'd been sealed. The morning was gray and cold, the kind of northern morning that insisted on being taken seriously. Marisol rose before anyone called her. Habit. She had not slept in past dawn in 4 years. Her body had lost the ability to trust darkness long enough to rest in it. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, was at the door before she remembered she could open it herself. She stood there for a moment, hand on the latch. Then she opened it and walked out. The corridor was dim and quiet at this hour, lit by the thin light coming through high, narrow windows and by the warm glow of sconces that had not yet been snuffed. She followed the smell of bread and fire in the direction she thought was the kitchen, and found, instead, a courtyard. It was a small one, tucked inside the interior wall, and it had clearly been designed for nothing practical. No kitchen gardens here, No stable access, no functional purpose. Just a square of flagstone with a stone bench and, incongruously, a pear tree trained against the eastern wall, bare now but for a few last leaves, its branches spreading in the particular careful way of a tree that someone had tended for a long time. Brannock was already there. He sat on the bench with his back to her, a cup of something steaming in both hands, and for one disorienting moment he looked, not like a king, not like the thing the market square had assembled. He sat like a man who had come out here to be alone with a cup and a tree, and he hadn't heard her, which meant she was standing at the courtyard entrance watching him without his knowledge, which was something she had not done to another person. Watched them without their knowledge, without her guard up, without mapping exits. In 4 years. She should go. She went in. His head turned before her second footstep. She had expected that. He was a wolf. She had forgotten briefly that his hearing was not human. She walked to the other end of the bench and sat, leaving significant space between them, and looked at the pear tree. They says thing for a moment. "The cook starts at dawn," he said eventually. "If you want food before that, there's yesterday's bread in the hall cupboard." "I know where bread is," she said. A small silence. She thought she felt something shift in it. "How old are you?" he asked. 24. He turned to look at her. She felt his gaze on the side of her face the way she felt heat. A directed warmth, specific, impossible to ignore. She did not turn. "You've been alone for a long time," he said. It was not a question. She said nothing. "The scar on your hand," he said. "Snit rings leave oval pressure scars. The cutting scar is on top of it, which means the ring was removed after the scar had formed, which means you wore the ring for at least several years before someone took it." A pause. Marisol. She was on her feet. The knife was in her hand before she had finished standing. Not raised, just held, the body knowing what the mind was a half-second behind. Her breath was gone. Her name. He had said her name, her actual name, the full thing, the name she had not heard in 4 years, and he had said it the way people say names they have been carrying. Not like a discovery, but like a confirmation. The final piece settling into a shape he'd already begun to see. She was calculating exits. She was calculating exits and simultaneously aware, with the specific clarity of panic, that both guards would be close, that the walls were high, that the gap in the eastern wall was back in Veth 4 days behind her, and she had not yet mapped this courtyard, and she should have mapped it first thing. She should have. "Sit down," he said. The same soft voice. No edge. "I'm not sending word to anyone. I'm not going to hurt you, but I am going to need you to hear something. I don't know what you're." Marisol. Again, still quiet. "Your father was King Aldrich of Ethvar. Your mother was Senna Alvith, who was born in this territory, which is why you carry a trace of northern bloodline under the southern royal. You were 20 years old when Casimir Vael killed your family and took the throne. You've been in tribute service for 4 years, not 18 months, and your hands have been deliberately roughened, which a girl from debt bond servitude would not do, because she would have been doing labor, not artificially aging her skin." He waited. "Shall I continue?" Her jaw was tight. Her hand was tight around the knife. "You've been looking for me," she said. "No. Simple. Direct. I've been buying tribute lots for 3 years. The entire lot, every time I'm called to the tribute block. I bring them here. I give them work or money or passage to wherever they want to go. I wasn't looking for you. But I would have been lying if I said I wasn't aware that Casimir still hadn't found the last of the old royal house, and that whoever that person was, they were probably in the tribute system, because that's where people go when they need to be invisible." He paused. "You're very good at it." "Not good enough," she said, and hated the way her voice came out on it, thin, tight. The voice of a woman holding herself together with discipline alone. "Good enough to fool everyone else," he said. "I'm not everyone else." She had not sat down. She was still standing with the knife, which was absurd, which she knew was absurd, but she couldn't make herself sheath it because the sheathing would mean something. It would mean she was accepting this. It would mean she was letting him in past the wall, the very careful wall, the wall that had kept her alive. "What do you want?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment. Then he set down his cup, stood, and turned to face her fully. In the gray morning light, with the pear tree behind him and steam rising from the cup on the bench, the scar through his eyebrow did its fractional question thing, and she thought, completely involuntarily, "He's tired, not physically. Something deeper. The tiredness of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time without putting it down. Casimir Vale stole a throne that wasn't his," he said. "He's been running a tribute system that enslaves the people of a kingdom he doesn't deserve to govern. He's been hunting the last living member of the royal house for 4 years because he knows what a living heir means." A pause. "I want him gone. I have wanted him gone for 3 years, and I have not been able to remove him without either starting a war that would cost more lives than his continued rule or finding." He stopped. Something moved in his face. Just for a moment. Something that was not the king. "A legitimate claim," she said. "A legitimate claim," he agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. The knife was still in her hand. She was aware of it. She was aware of him, the scent of him, which she was developing an involuntary and specifically unhelpful familiarity with, the particular gravity of his presence, the fact that his eyes, looking at her now, held the same quality they had held in the market square, when he'd closed her fist around her scar. She still didn't have a name for it. She was beginning to suspect she'd had the name for it once and had put it in the sealed place with everything else. "You're asking me to be visible," she said. "I've spent 4 years being invisible, because visible means dead. Casimir's reach is long," he said. "Casimir's reach stops at my border. His reach found me in Veth. I found you in Veth." His voice was even. "Casimir's men are not me." She turned her head away, looked at the pear tree, bare branches against gray stone, trained into a careful spread, shaped over years by someone who had worked at it slowly, who had chosen patience over speed. She thought about patience. She had been very patient. She had been patient for 4 years, and she had survived, and she had been so careful about surviving that she had nearly, the word came up against the sealed edge. She had nearly stopped. "I need to think," she said. "Yes," he said. "Just that, you won't." She stopped. "Try it again. I'm not asking for your protection. I'm not." She stopped again, frustrated with herself, with the way the words she wanted weren't in the vocabulary she'd built for surviving, which was a vocabulary of negations and deflections, and I don't know. Not one with words for what she was actually trying to say. "I know," he said. She looked at him. "The knife stays with you," he said. "Your door locks from the inside. You make your own choices in this house." A pause. "I would like you to let me tell you what I know about Casimir's current movements, and then I would like you to sleep on it for a week, and then you tell me what you want to do." "A week," she said. "You've had 4 years of fear. A week seems fair." She put the knife in her belt. It was not a surrender, it was just a reallocation of the hand. She needed both hands free right now. "I want to talk to the others," she said. "The people from the lot." Something shifted in his face, not surprise, exactly. More like recognition. "When?" "Today. I'll arrange it." She nodded once, turned, and walked back inside, and she felt his gaze following her until she rounded the corner and he could no longer see, and she stood in the corridor for a moment, with the knife at her hip and her blood running very fast. And something she had not felt in 4 years, working its way through her chest, like the first light through a crack in stone. She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, where the feeling was concentrated, pressed it flat and held it there. Not yet. She didn't know yet what yet meant. She just knew that the feeling needed to stay where it was for now, sealed and careful, until she knew what it was safe to do with it. She went to find the kitchen. She found the bread. She was still there when Dagmar arrived at dawn, and Dagmar, who clearly had opinions she was keeping to herself, poured her a cup of something hot without being asked and said nothing at all. She talked to the others over 2 days. She hadn't thought about this. Hadn't let herself think about the others as individuals because that was the kind of thinking that cost things. They were real people, which she had known intellectually and had filed away. The grandfather-aged man was named Paris, a former schoolteacher from a village that had been tribute taxed into emptiness. The 15-year-old was Corvan, who she'd already spoken to, who had been taken as debt payment for his family's farm. There was a woman named Bree who had been in the tribute system for 2 years and whose first question to Marisol was not, "Who are you?" but, "Can I trust this place?" which was exactly the right question, and for which Marisol did not yet have a complete answer. "I don't know," she told Breeze, "but the door locks from inside." Breeze had dark circles under her eyes and a way of sitting that kept her back to walls. She looked at Marisol for a long moment. "You know something," she said, "about this place." "About him." "A little," Marisol said. "I'm still learning." "You're not." Breeze stopped. Her eyes moved over Marisol, the quick, experienced assessment of a woman who had learned to read people for safety. "You're not what they brought you here for." Marisol was quiet. "I won't ask," Breeze said. "Just if you know something, when you know more." "Yes," Marisol said, "I'll tell you." Breeze nodded once and looked away. And Marisol sat with the weight of that promise and found that it had a different weight than other things she'd been carrying. It was heavier and, strangely, lighter at the same time. She met with Brannock on the 3rd day. He had a room on the keep's upper level that functioned as a working space. Not a throne room, not a lord's receiving chamber. More like the room a man uses when he actually needs to do things, rather than be seen doing things. There were maps, a great many maps. The detailed kind, the kind that took years to assemble, showing not just geography but road conditions, supply lines, garrison sizes, written in a small, clear hand that she suspected was his own. She wanted to look at them with the part of her that had spent 4 years on the move, that had built its own mental maps from fragments and rumor, that was suddenly aware it might have access to better information. She looked at him instead. He was standing at the table, not sitting in state. Not arranged for an audience. He looked up when she came in. The scar through his eyebrow did its fractional question thing. "Casimir's air hunter," she said. "Who is it?" He was quiet for a moment. "You want the practical information first. I want to understand my actual situation before I make decisions about it." He pulled out a chair at the table. Not his chair, the one beside it, across from the maps. An offer. She sat. He sat across from her and told her. His name was Soren Vale, Casimir's second cousin, younger, hungrier, with a talent for finding things that didn't want to be found. He had traced the last royal heir as far as the western tribute markets 8 months ago. Brannock's intelligence suggested Soren believed the heir had either died in the tribute system or escaped south toward the coast. He was currently working the southern routes. "He's wrong about the south," Marisol said. "Yes, for now." She looked at the maps, at the wide spread of territory that Casimir controlled, south of the Kelrath, at the smaller but significantly denser north. How long before he turns north? 6 weeks. Maybe 8. She pressed her fingers against the table. The signet scar on her left hand was turned upward. She was aware of it in the way she was always aware of it. The phantom weight of the ring that was no longer there. Her father had put it on her finger when she turned 18. He had said, "This is not a decoration. This is a word. When you speak with this ring, you speak with the voice of the house." She had been 20 when the voice of the house was silenced. She had been speaking in a whisper ever since. "I need to know what you want from this," she said. "What you actually want." He looked at her. Not the calculating look she'd half expected, the king assembling his strategy, the wolf weighing his territory. Just looked at her. steady and direct, and she was learning to read him in increments, which was making her increasingly aware that most of what she'd assembled about him from rumor was wrong, and this was both useful and profoundly destabilizing. "I want Casimir off the throne and the tribute system abolished," he said. "I want the people who've been enslaved in it for the last 9 years to have something to go back to." He paused. "I want to be able to look at this territory and not know that every tribute wagon that crosses my border is leaving people behind who'll fill the next one. And you need an heir to do that. I need a legitimate ruler," he said. "Someone the Southern Lords will recognize. Someone Casimir can't dismiss as northern aggression." His voice was even. "You're that person whether you want to be or not. That's not in my power to change. I won't pretend it is." She appreciated that. She appreciated it the way she appreciated the knife and the unlocked door. As honesty, which was not something she had expected from a king, and which was forcing her to revise a great many assessments. "What do you want for yourself?" she asked. "Not for the territory. Not for the tribute system. For you." A silence. Long enough that she heard the fire. "I want to stop buying slave lots," he said, "and know there are no more to buy." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the maps. "Show me the garrisons," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not dramatic. A small loosening at the corner of his mouth, barely a thing at all. He turned the nearest map toward her and began. Days shaped themselves, more quickly than she had expected. She spent mornings with the maps and Brannock's intelligence on Casimir's territorial holdings, learning the landscape of a war she hadn't known she was preparing to fight. Brannock never told her what she was supposed to think about what she read. He presented information and let her make of it what she would, which was. Again, she kept returning to this with something she couldn't quite call surprise. Because surprise implied a prior expectation, and she hadn't expected anything. The behavior of a man who genuinely intended to leave decisions to her. She spent afternoons with the former tribute lot. Briss had settled into the keep's herb garden work with the contained determination of a woman who needed her hands occupied. Paris was already teaching. The keep's youngest staff had found him within 2 days and started bringing their questions, and he had the particular warm sternness of a man who needed to be of use. Corvin had been given a role in the stables, which he had clearly been hoping for, and had taken to watching Brannock's pack with a focused, careful attention that Marisol recognized. The attention of someone cataloging safety. She told them, in pieces, over several days, who she was. Not everything at once. She told Bree first, because Breeze had asked the right question. Then Paris, who listened without expression and then said quietly, "I knew your father's work. He built 3 schools in the South Provinces. I taught at one." She had not expected that. It moved through her like heat through stone. Slow, undeniable, arriving in parts. She told Corvin last, because she was most uncertain how a 15-year-old would carry it. He was quiet for a moment after she told him. Then he said, "So you're going to take it back?" She looked at him. "The throne," he said. "That's what this is for." She had not yet said that. She had not said anything close to that. She had been sitting with the question for days like a stone in her hand, turning it, feeling its weight, not yet ready to put it down or throw it. "I don't know," she said honestly. He nodded, slow, like he was accepting something more than the answer. "My village had a schools," he said. "Casimir's men taxed it closed 3 years ago. She held that." "I know," she said. The moment arrived not as a decision, but as a recognition. She was in the small courtyard, the one with the pear tree. She had been going there in the mornings because it was the one place in the keep where she had been first alone and then not alone, and where some membrane between then and now had worn thin. She had the knife in her belt, as always, and a cup of something hot that Dagmar had pressed on her, with the specific authority of a woman who had strong opinions about people eating enough. The tree had lost all its leaves. She was looking at the bare branches against the sky. lighter today, the clouds moving, a thin blue showing through at the edges, and she was thinking about her mother. Not around the sealed edge of the word before, through it. She was thinking about her mother's voice when she said the constellation names, the particular cadence of it, the love in it that had not been demonstrative love. Her mother had been a contained woman, practical, careful, a queen who had understood what queenship cost, but that had come through in the care with which she named things, as if the names were precious. Marisol. She had a name. She had spent 4 years not using it, and it was still there, still hers, still. She pressed her fingers against her sternum the way she had that first morning, except this time the feeling wasn't something to contain. It was something to acknowledge. She was still here. She had survived. She had become very good at surviving. But she had been so careful about surviving that she had nearly. She allowed the word now. Let it come all the way. She had nearly stopped living. She heard his footsteps. She recognized them now, the particular even rhythm. She had learned them in less than a week in the way the body learns things that matter without being told to. He stopped at the courtyard entrance. "Sorry," he said. "This is your hour here." "Sit down," she said. He did. The other end of the bench, the space he always left, and she thought, he does this every time. He never closes the distance. He leaves it to her. She thought about how long he must have been doing that, leaving distance for people to choose, in a world that had given most of them no choices, and something in her chest pulled tight. "I've made a decision," she said. He said nothing. Waited. "I'm going to take it back." She looked at the tree, the bare branches, the sky going pale blue at the edges. "The throne, my name, all of it." She paused. "I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know the shape of it. But I know I'm done being nothing." He was quiet for a moment. She felt the quality of his silence. It wasn't the silence of a man calculating. It was the silence of someone feeling something carefully. "Good," he said. "Just that. Just the one word." She looked at the tree and breathed. "There's something else," she said. "Tell me. I need to talk to your pack." A pause. "Not as your guest. As." She stopped. Tried again. "I need them to know who I am before this goes any further. If they're going to follow this." She stopped up again. The word she was trying to reach was me. She was trying to say, "Follow me." And it was harder than she'd expected. Not because she lacked the courage for it, but because the part of her that had learned to be no one had gotten its hooks into the word and was not releasing easily. "Follow me," she said. "I know," he said. "And yes. Today, if you want." She nodded. She reached out then, not thinking about it, the way she'd asked the question about why he'd bought the lot, the way her body sometimes moved faster than her planning, and she touched the scar through his eyebrow. Just briefly. One fingertip, the ridge of old scar tissue under her calloused finger. She felt him go entirely still. She pulled her hand back. "Sorry," she said. "Don't be," he said. She looked at the tree. He looked at the tree. The morning light came in at the edges of the clouds and lit the bare branches to gold. And neither of them said anything for a long time, and the silence between them was not the silence of two people with nothing to say. The pack hall was the largest room in the keep, which did not mean it was a throne room. Marisol had been in throne rooms. She had grown up in one, had learned to stand in them with a particular quality of presence, had watched her father and mother navigate the specific theater of formal power with the practiced ease of people who had never been uncertain of their right to stand at the center. She had been told, once, by her mother's closest advisor, that she stood like a queen already. That there was something in her posture when she walked into a large room that caused eyes to follow. She had spent 4 years deliberately breaking that quality. She had been very thorough. She walked into the pack hall and felt it returning. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just, her spine straightened. Her chin lifted fractionally, her feet found the floor with a kind of assurance that was older than the last 4 years. She did not decide to do it. Her body did it because bodies remember things the mind tries to bury. There were perhaps 40 people in the hall. Pack, not staff. She had learned to distinguish them, the way a wolf's wolf-blood people carried themselves, something in their stillness that was not tension but readiness. They ranged from gray-haired elders to young men and women who had the look of people who had been fighting alongside Brannock long enough to trust him absolutely, which was a thing she recognized even though she had never had a pack of her own. The trust a person carries in their body when they are certain of the one who leads them. They looked at her. She looked back. Brannock stood to her right, not in front of her, not presenting her, present beside her. "This is Marisol of Ethvar," he said, last of the old royal house. Casimir Vale's heir hunter has been looking for her for 4 years. She has been in the tribute system since the fall of her family. A pause. "She's asked to speak to you." He stepped back. She looked at the pack, at the faces, wary, assessing, some openly skeptical, one woman in the front row with dark brows drawn down in a specific kind of challenge. She knew that face. She had worn that face. "You don't know me," she said. Her voice was steady. She was interested to discover that it was steady. "You have no reason to trust a woman who's been hiding for 4 years and walked in here and said she's a queen. I understand that." She paused. "I've spent 4 years being very careful about who to trust, and I still don't have it fully settled. So I'm not asking for trust." Another pause. "I'm asking for," she searched for the word. Not loyalty, not allegiance. Something smaller, earlier. "I'm asking for a chance to earn it." The woman in the front row had not uncrossed her arms. "You're asking us to go to war," she said. "For a throne that's been empty 9 years. I'm asking you to help me end a tribute system that has been emptying your border territories for 9 years. Marisol said. "The throne is the mechanism, not the point." She looked at the woman. "What's your name?" A pause. Ria. She held the woman's gaze. "How many tribute wagons have you watched cross the Kelrath?" A longer pause. "Too many," Ria said. "Yes," Marisol said, "too many." She looked at the rest of the hall. "I'm not here to tell you. This will be simple." It won't be. Casimir has resources, and he has Sorin Vale, and he has the Southern Lords who've gotten comfortable with his governance. What I have is a name and a claim, and whatever I can build. She paused. "And apparently you're Alpha King, which suggests either you trust his judgment, or I'm in a great deal more trouble than I thought." A small ripple in the hall, not quite laughter, but something that lived near it. She felt the room shift slightly. Brannock, to her right, was very still. She did not look at him. "I'll take questions," she said. They gave her questions. For an hour they gave her questions, some practical, some pointed. One from a young man near the back that was so specific about grain supply routes and garrison withdrawal timing that she realized he must have been thinking about this problem for some time and had been waiting for someone to ask. She answered the ones she could. She said, "I don't know yet," to the ones she couldn't. She did not perform certainty. At the end, Ria, who had not uncrossed her arms for the entire hour, said, "The tribute lot you came in with. The others. What happens to them?" Marisol looked at her. "They get to choose," she said. "That's the first thing. Whatever comes after that, any of it. The first thing is that they choose." Ria looked at her for a long moment. Then she uncrossed her arms. She found Brannock afterward in the corridor outside the hall. He was leaning against the wall with his arms folded, the posture of a man who had been waiting without impatience, and when she came through the door, he looked at her the way he had looked at her in the market square. Not the scenting look, the other one. The look she still hadn't named. "Good," she said before he could speak. She was slightly breathless. She had been holding herself very steady in the hall for an hour, and the unclenching was happening now, in the corridor, where no one except him could see it. "Yes," he said. She pressed her back against the wall beside him. They stood like that for a moment, side by side, shoulder almost to shoulder. The space he always left, which she had closed a fraction herself. Rhea, she said. My second, he said. She's been running border intelligence on Casimir's tribute movements for 3 years. She's also the best blade in the pack, which she will tell you herself the first chance she gets, because she is not modest about it. A small sound came out of Marisol. Not quite a laugh, the shape of one. When did you last laugh? He asked. She thought about it seriously. I'm not sure. He looked at her profile. She felt it, that directed warmth, specific, unmistakable. We should change that, he said. She turned her head. He was close enough that the shift brought their faces into a proximity that made the air between them feel different, dense. She could smell him clearly now. Pine and cold water and the animal thing underneath that still did what it did to her pulse in spite of everything, in spite of every rational reason to keep the wall exactly where she'd built it. One thing at a time, she said, his mouth curved. Not a full smile, something restrained, something held. The kind of expression that cost something to hold back. One thing at a time, he agreed. She looked away, breathed. Her pulse was doing things she was not going to acknowledge. Soren Vale has 6 weeks, she said. Maybe 8. Yes, we need to move before he does. I know. I'm going to need a plan that doesn't start with an army crossing the river, because that hands Casimir the narrative. Northern aggression, exactly what he's always said you were. I know that, too. She looked at him sidelong. Do you have thoughts on it? Several. I've been working on them for 3 years. A pause. I've been waiting for the piece I was missing. She held that. Don't, she said, not unkindly. I didn't say anything. You were about to say something that would make this complicated. A silence. She felt him choose not to say it. She appreciated that too. Maps, she said. Tonight, after supper. Tonight, he agreed. She pushed off the wall and walked down the corridor. She did not look back. She was very good at not looking back. She had been practicing for 4 years. She was slightly less good at it now. In this corridor, in this keep, with the knife in her belt and the feeling in her chest that she was still pressing flat with the heel of her hand every time it tried to rise. She let it rise, once, for 3 steps. Then she pressed it flat again. One thing at a time. The plan they built over the following 2 weeks was not a military plan. It was a surgical one. Marisol had grown up in a court. She knew how courts worked, their rivalries and dependencies, the way the powerful positioned themselves against each other, the specific leverage points that a careful person could press to make large structures move without touching them directly. She had known this at 20. Academic knowledge acquired in preparation for a life she'd never gotten to live. And she had spent 4 years running from courts and telling herself that knowledge was useless now. She had been wrong. The knowledge was still there. Under the 4 years of survival vocabulary, under the roughened hands and the practiced invisibility, it was still there, a whole other self waiting. She didn't like how easily it came back, and then she thought about what easily meant. It meant it had always been hers. The plan had 3 parts. The first, communication to the southern lords, who had never been comfortable with Casimir's rule, but who had been too isolated and too frightened to act alone. Brannock's network was more extensive than she'd expected. 3 years of quiet intelligence gathering had given him contacts in courts she hadn't thought penetrable. She wrote the letters, not in her own hand. They went through Brannock's cipher. But the voice was hers, and the arguments were hers. And she watched the replies arrive, over 10 days, and understood them in ways she hadn't understood 10 days ago, because she was reading them with the part of herself that had been a princess before it had been a slave. The second, the tribute records. This was her idea, and it came to her at 3 in the morning on the 7th day of planning, when she was sitting with the maps and the cold fire and the knife and her own thoughts. Casimir had kept meticulous tribute records. He was that kind of usurper, the kind who documented everything, partly for control and partly for the specific vanity of a man who wanted evidence of what he'd taken. 3 years ago, Brannock's intelligence network had gotten access to those records. They hadn't known what to do with them. They were evidence of atrocity, but evidence without a forum was just paper. A legitimate ruler had a forum. A legitimate ruler, presenting the evidence of every person taken from every village in tribute service for 9 years, to the assembled southern lords who had been pretending not to know. That was something else. It's not just an accusation, she said to Brannock, her finger on the stack of copied records. It's a reckoning. It makes them complicit if they don't act. He looked at her across the table. The fire was low. The room was dim. It was very late, and they had been here for hours, and his hair was loose from where it had been tied, hanging to his jaw, and he looked tired in the particular way of a man whose tiredness she had stopped finding, alarming and started finding, personal. Like something she had the right to notice. Yes, he said. You've had these for 3 years, she said. I didn't have the forum. You had the power. You could have taken the throne by force 3 years ago. He looked at her steadily. Yes, he said, I could have. The silence said the rest. She looked at the records. She thought about a man who had the power to take something and chose not to, because taking was not the same as rightness, and rightness apparently mattered to him in a way that power alone did not. She thought about the knife he'd put in her hand on the first night. The third part is me, she said. Yes, I have to be seen. She said it flatly. Inventory, not emotion. Casimir's strength is in the uncertainty. While the air is hidden, he can hunt her, and the hunting keeps people afraid. The fear is the tool. Remove the uncertainty. Remove the tool. Yes. She pressed her hand flat on the table. Left hand. The scar faced up. I have to stand in front of Casimir's court and name myself. With witnesses. With the records. With the southern lords who've had 10 days to decide which side of this they want to be on. It will bring Soren Vale. I know. He's very good at what he does. I know. She met his eyes. So am I. At different things. He looked at her for a moment. That look. She still hadn't named it. She was starting to think she had been not naming it deliberately, in the same way she had been pressing the feeling flat with the heel of her hand. Because naming it would make it real, and real things could be taken. And she had had too many real things taken already. I'll have Rhea put together an escort, he said. I want to ask Rhea myself. Of course. And I want. She stopped. This one was harder, not logistically, personally. I want the others from the lot to know before I go. All of them, not just who I am. What's happening? Why? A pause. They should have the choice to go somewhere safe before this gets loud. Yes, he said. You agree too easily, she said. I'm waiting for the part where you tell me what I'm not thinking of. Something moved in his face. The almost smile. You're not thinking about what happens after, he said. You're thinking about the reclamation, and you're thinking about the reckoning, and you're not thinking about what comes when it's done. She was quiet. The throne, he said, simply. I know what comes when it's done. Do you want it? She looked at the maps, the spread of territory, the lines of roads and rivers, the small marks that indicated villages and tribute posts and garrison towns. All of it, the weight of all of it. I want what it does, she said carefully. I want the tribute system ended. I want the records entered into law so this can't be done again. I want the people who were taken to have something to go back to. She paused. The throne is the mechanism, not the point. You said that to the pack, it's true. He was quiet for a moment. Then, a mechanism can also be a home. She looked at him. He was looking at the maps, not at her, and his profile in the low firelight was. She stopped cataloging. Some things didn't need inventory. One thing at a time, she said for the second time. One thing at a time, he said, for the second time. She told the lot on a clear morning, 7 days before she planned to leave. She gathered them in Dagmar's kitchen, which was the warmest room in the keep. and which Dagmar had vacated with the specific tact of a woman who understood that some conversations needed space. Marisol stood at one end of the long table, and they sat along it, Brius, Paris, Corvan, and the 9 others, from the lot whose names she had learned over the past weeks, and she told them everything, her name. Her family, the usurpation, 4 years in tribute service, what Brannock had been doing and why, what she was about to do and why. The room was quiet when she finished. Bree spoke first. "What do you need from us?" "Nothing," Marisol said. "I need nothing from you. What you need from me is the choice. You can go anywhere. Brannock's network can get you out of the territories, west or south or across the sea. You can stay here. You can come south and—" She stopped. "I'm not asking you to follow this. I'm asking you to be safe while it happens." Corvin was looking at her with those dark, serious eyes. "My village had a school," he said again. "I remember," she said. "I'm coming. Corvin, I'm 15, not dead." His jaw was set in a way she recognized as absolute. "I'm coming." She looked at him for a long moment. The bruise along his jaw had fully faded now. In the keep's good light, and with 3 weeks of consistent food, he looked less like a boy the tribute system had swallowed, and more like a boy who was going to be formidable in approximately 4 years if nothing stopped him. "You follow Ria's orders," she said. "Not mine, Ria's." He nodded. Briss was nodding too, quietly, without drama. Paris said nothing, which Marisol had already learned meant assent. Around the table, one by one, not all of them, 3 chose to go west, and she pressed their hands and meant the goodbye. The rest of them settled into the decision the way people settle into something true. She didn't say thank you. It felt like the wrong word, too small and too much at the same time. She pressed her left hand flat on the table, the scar faced up. "I want to say one thing," she said. "Before we do any of this." She looked around the table. "I know what it costs. To come back from nowhere. To be seen again after you've spent a long time making yourself invisible." She paused. The sealed place was fully open now. She was speaking directly from it, without the wall, and it was not as terrifying as she'd thought it would be. "I haven't wanted my life back for a long time. I kept it. I kept going, but I stopped wanting it. I was so focused on surviving that I forgot why." She let that sit for a moment. "I remember now. I thought you should know." The kitchen was very quiet. Dagmar came back in shortly after, looked at the faces around the table, and without comment began making a second round of something hot for everyone. She went to Brannock that evening. He was in the courtyard with the pear tree again, which she had come to understand was what he did in the evenings. Came here, sat, was alone. She had not intruded on it before this. She sat on the bench beside him, closer than she'd sat before, and the space between them was less than it had been on any previous occasion. He waited. "There's something I haven't told you," she said. He was quiet. "The night my family was killed, the usurpation, Casimir had help. From inside the court." She paused. "There was someone who knew when my father would be unguarded. Someone who gave Casimir's men the servant passages. The usurpation should not have succeeded as cleanly as it did without inside intelligence." She paused again. "I don't know who it was. I've been thinking about it for 4 years. I have a list of 4 possible people. One of them is dead. The other 3 are still at Casimir's court. You want to find them before you walk into that court," he said. "I need to walk in knowing who in that room might be watching for a signal to move against me that isn't Casimir's. I have some intelligence on Casimir's inner court." "But," he stopped. The pause was specific. "I can't tell you which one of your 4 it is. I've had eyes in that court for 3 years and I haven't found it." "I know." She leaned back slightly on the bench. The cold night air came in off the hills, clean and dark, pine and stone and something winter clear. "I wanted you to know that it's a gap in the plan." He was quiet for a moment. "You're telling me because you want me to know the risk, not because you want me to fix it." "Yes." Another silence. "There's something I haven't told you," he said. She looked at him. "The first time I scented you," he said, "at the tribute block." He was looking at the tree. His profile in the moonlight was very still. "I told you I could scent lineage." "That's true. I can. Old royal blood has a particular quality. It's part of how pack histories were kept, before courts and documents." A pause. "That's not the only thing I scented." She waited. "In my world," he said carefully, "there are bonds. Between wolves. Between pack members who are matched, in the old sense. It's involuntary, biological. The scent is unmistakable, and it doesn't ask for anyone's permission. And I have never." He stopped, started again. "I have never scented it before. In 34 years. I had largely concluded that it was a story older wolves told." A pause. "I wanted you to know. Not because it obligates you. Not because it changes anything. Because I told you I wouldn't keep information from you when it was relevant. And this is relevant. And you deserve to make decisions knowing it." She sat very still. The courtyard was quiet. The moon was up over the keep's eastern wall, and the pear tree's bare branches made shadows on the flagstones. And she was sitting beside a man who had just said the most significant thing anyone had said to her in 4 years, and was now sitting completely still, not pressing her, not watching her face for a reaction. Just waiting, leaving the distance for her to choose. She breathed. "How long have you known?" she asked. "The market square," he said, "the moment I stopped. A week and a half." He had known for a week and a half, and he had given her a knife and an unlocked door, and the map room, and every piece of intelligence she'd asked for, and had not once used this, had not leveraged it, had not mentioned it until she had a plan and a purpose and a choice. She turned her head to look at him. He was already looking at her. "I'm not going to tell you what I think about that yet," she said, "because I need to think about it clearly, and I can't think about it clearly right now." "I know," he said. "I'm also so not. I want to say this clearly. I'm not frightened of it." Something moved in his face. That look, again. She named it then, finally, in the dark of the courtyard, with the moon up and the plan assembled, and the 4 years behind her and everything she was about to walk into in front. It was the look of a man who had been very patient, and who was still being patient, and who had made peace with continuing to be patient for as long as it took. She knew what that looked like. She had worn it for 4 years. She reached across the bench and took his hand. She held it for a moment. Their hands on the cold stone between them, her scarred left hand inside his, the warmth of him spreading up her arm. He did not move. He did not press. He just held. She let go before she was ready to. She did it anyway. She said, "Tomorrow," he said. But the tomorrow she meant never quite arrived, because Soren Vale moved early. She was in the map room at dawn when Rhea came in without knocking, which Marisol had already learned meant urgency. "Rider," Rhea said, "from the eastern border post. Soren Vale crossed Galarath 2 days ago. He's not following the western routes. He's heading north." Marisol looked at the map, felt the space between now and when she'd planned to move compressed down to nothing. "He's been told," she said. "Someone told him I was here. That's what it looks like, the list of 4. She said it to herself as much as Rhea. One of them found out. Brannock was already in the doorway. He had clearly been moving fast. He was still pulling on his belt, his hair unbound, and he looked in that moment so precisely like a man who had been sleeping and had woken into danger, and had come straight to where she was that something in her chest clenched hard. "I heard," he said. "How long?" she asked Rhea. 4 days. Maybe 5 if the roads are bad. 4 days. The plan had been designed for 7. She looked at the map. She ran the numbers. The southern lords who had received letters and had 10 days to consider them, the ones who had replied positively. The distance from here to Casimir's court. The distance from Soren Vale's likely approach to Casimir's court. The window. "It still works," she said, "if we move today." "Today," Rhea said. "Not a question. Today." She looked at Brannock. "How fast can we move?" "Faster than you're imagining," he said. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her in the map room late at night, reading her the way she was learning to let herself be read, the specific attention of a man who was paying full care to something that mattered. The pack can cover the distance in 2 days if we move mounted and light. The others from the lot, Corvan and Brees, can ride, Rhea said with the flatness of someone who had already assessed this. The rest travel with the second group, which moves on a different route and arrives at the gathering point by a different road. Marisol nodded. She looked at the map one more time. At the lines of roads, the marked garrisons, the Southern Lord's estates, Casimir's court at the center of it, like a knot. She had been looking at this map for 2 weeks. She knew it now the way she knew skies, by rote, by inventory, by necessity. She knew the route she was about to travel. She pressed her hand flat on the map, left hand. Scar up. Let's go, she said. They moved fast and light as promised. Marisol rode. She had not ridden in 4 years and had expected to feel it, the absence of the muscle memory. But it came back in the first hour the way the court posture had come back in the pack hall, the body surfacing things the mind had tried to bury. She rode beside Brannock and slightly behind him, which was a deliberate positioning, not subordinate, but practical. He could read the terrain faster, and she needed to see what he was reading. Rhea was at her other side. They had exchanged approximately 15 words since leaving the keep, which felt like the right amount for a 3-day ride with Soren Vale behind them and Casimir's court ahead. On the first night, they made camp in the shelter of a tree line, no fire. She sat with her back against a tree and listened to the dark, which was what she'd always done in hard situations. Listened, catalogued, assembled. The horses were quiet. The pack's wolves. 3 of them had shifted on Brannock's instruction to run the perimeter, moved through the trees with a silence that she felt rather than heard. A periodic displacement of air, a warmth that passed and returned. Brannock sat nearby, awake. She knew he was awake. Tell me about Casimir's court, she said. Low, he told her. What his intelligence had assembled, the seating arrangements, the favored lords, the 3 who had replied to her letters. He told it without theater, in the same even way he gave all information, and she assembled it alongside what she already carried and built, in the dark and the cold, the complete picture of what she was walking into. The speech, she said. What about it? I've been writing it for a week. In my head. She paused. I don't know if it's right. Tell it to me. She did. Low, in the dark, no audience but him and the quiet woods and the wolves on the perimeter. She told it straight through, from the opening. My name is Maris Sol Aldrich Ethvar, last of the royal house of Ethvar, and I have been in your tribute system for 4 years. To the close, and it was not a polished speech. It was direct and plain and said exactly what it meant and made no apologies. He was quiet when she finished. Don't change anything, he said. She breathed out. Something loosened. On the second day, they passed through a village that had been tribute taxed. She could see it in the empty houses, the untended fields, the particular stillness of a place that had been hollowed. She rode through it without speaking. The pack was quiet around her. That evening, Corvan rode up beside her. Is that? He was looking back at the village. The expression on his face was the specific expression of someone seeing their own history in someone else's. Yes, she said. He rode beside her for a while without speaking. Then, we're going to end it. Yes, she said. Not just for you, he said. Like he needed to say it. Like he needed to hear himself say it. Not just for me, she agreed. He fell back. She rode on. The Southern Lords were waiting. Not all 4. One had been more afraid than his outrage and had not come. But 3 had, which was enough, and they arrived at the prearranged meeting point on the 3rd day with their escorts and their seals and the particular expressions of people who had made a decision they were not comfortable with and were present anyway. Marisol met them on foot, in plain clothes, her hair down. She had thought about this, about what to wear, what to carry, how to present herself. and had concluded that the most powerful thing she could do was arrive without performance. Let them see exactly what 4 years of tribute service looked like on a royal heir, and let them decide what that meant about the man who'd been running the tribute system. The eldest of the three was Lord Fenris of the Eastern Estates. White-haired and heavy with the weight of a man who had been making compromises for a long time. He looked at her for a long moment. "You have her eyes," he said, "your mother's eyes, Senna Alvith. I knew her when she was young." She held very still. "I remember her," she said. He looked at her scar. He looked at her hands. He looked at her face, and then, with the slow deliberateness of a man choosing, he bowed. Not deeply. Not the bow of a courtier to a queen, the bow of an old man to a wrong he had let continue too long. "Tell us what you need," he said. They arrived at Casimir's court 4 days after Soren Vale had crossed the Kelrath. She had half expected Soren to be there before them, to walk into a trap already sprung, Casimir's men waiting, the speech unspoken, the plan collapsed. She had held that possibility in her planning and made a secondary plan for it and ridden anyway. Because the alternative was riding back north and being careful and invisible for another 4 years, and she was done with that. But they arrived first. Because Brannock had been right, the pack was faster. The court was in session when they entered, or what passed for session in Casimir Vale's governance, which was more theatrical than functional, a daily display of the usurper's comfort in his stolen chair. She had gathered this from Brannock's intelligence. Casimir liked to be seen comfortable, liked to demonstrate, daily, that the throne was his and sitting in it was easy. She came in through the main doors. She came in walking, not carried, not announced, not surrounded by guards, performing her importance. She came in with Brannock at her left, and Rhea at her right, and Lord Fenris and his 2 colleagues behind her and the pack behind them, and she walked the length of the court hall, with her spine straight and her head up, and her left hand open, scar visible, because she was done closing her fist around it. The court went quiet, the way courts goes quiet when something has changed that they don't yet have language for. Casimir Vale was. She looked at him for the first time. She had been 20 when her family died. She had seen him once, at a distance, on the day of the usurpation, and had carried the impression of him for 4 years as a shape without a face. He had a face now, middle-aged, solid, the face of a man who had been secure in his power for so long that the power had settled into his posture like weight. He looked at her with the expression of a man encountering something his mind had not finished categorizing. She watched him categorize hers. She watched the moment his expression changed. "My name," she said into the silence, "is Marisol Aldrich Aethvar." Her voice filled the hall. She had not expected that. The reach of it, the way it traveled. But her mother had been a speaker, and her father, and apparently the body remembered how to do this too. "I am the last living heir of the royal house of Aethvar. I have been in your tribute system for 4 years. I entered it 2 weeks after your men killed my family and cut the signet ring from my hand." The hall was absolutely silent. She held up her left hand. The scar caught the light. Casimir Vale took a throne that was not his by right and has held it for 9 years through a system of taxation and tribute that has taken. She reached into her coat and produced the copied tribute records, which she had been carrying against her skin since they'd left Vareth Keep. 12,411 people from their homes, their villages, their families. I have the records. Lord Fenris of the Eastern Estates has reviewed them. Lords Korath and Mevrin have reviewed them. They are here to confirm that these records are accurate. She looked at Casimir. "You could not find me," she said, "because I was in your system. I was one of the 12,000. And you built that system so thoroughly that you could not see what was moving through it." She heard, from behind her, the doors at the hall's far end. More footsteps. She did not turn. She knew what it was. She had planned it. the second group, arriving through the rear entrance, which Brannock's intelligence had identified as underguarded, because no one had ever mounted an entrance through it. The second group was the rest of the tribute lot from Veth. 11 people, in their keep clothes, walking into a court hall that had never been built to see them as anything except the currency of a tribute system. She heard a lord near the front make a sound that was not quite language. She heard someone else move, a chair, hastily. "These 11 people," she said, "were in the same tribute lot I arrived in. They came from villages in your territories. They are the people you built your comfort on." She paused. "They're here to watch." She looked at Casimir again. He had recovered. She had to give him credit for that. He had been surprised, and he had recovered, and what was on his face now was not fear, but the calculating expression of a man assembling a strategy. He was going to speak. She could see him gathering it. She spoke first. "I am not here to execute you," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I am here to end what you built and to take back what you took. What happens to you is a matter for the lords of this court." She looked at the assembled courtiers, the faces of people who had been making compromises for 9 years, and were now being asked to decide. "Every one of you has a choice, today, in this room. Make it." Casimir stood. He was larger standing than he'd appeared sitting, and his voice, when he spoke, was the voice of a man who had learned to use it as a weapon, broad, projecting, aimed. "This woman," he started. "Has a name," Brannock said. His voice was quiet. It was always quiet. But it went across the entire hall the way a stone dropped in still. Water goes to every edge. Casimir looked at him. Something moved in Casimir's expression, the reassessment of a man who had held Brannock at a careful distance for 6 years and was recalculating the nature of that distance in real time. "The Northern Wolf Lord," Casimir said, "has brought an insurgent to my court, the Alpha King of Verath," Rhea said from Marisol's right, with the specific flatness of a woman who had spent 3 years running border intelligence and was very tired of pretense, has escorted the rightful heir of Ethvar to the court where her claim has standing. The hall shifted. Marisol felt it. Not physically, but in the way the air changes when a room full of people changes their minds collectively, or begins to. She saw it in the faces of the courtiers nearest her, the ones who had been still as statues tilting fractionally, imperceptibly toward something. "Lord Fenris," she said, without looking away from Casimir. "The records." Fenris stepped forward. He was carrying them, the full set, bound and sealed, the physical weight of 9 years of Casimir's tribute system in his old, deliberate hands. He set them on the nearest table, with a sound like a small judgment. "Witnessed and certified," he said. "Korath," Marisol said. "Witnessed and certified," Korath said. "Mevrin." "Witnessed and certified." 3 voices. 3 seals, 3 lords of the Southern Territories who had been compromising for 9 years and had decided, in this room, that this was the day they stopped. Casimir was looking at the records. He was looking at the lords. He was looking at Marisol with an expression that was shifting, very fast, from strategy to something it was trying not to be. She pressed her left hand flat on the nearest table, scar up. Her father's voice was in her head. "When you speak with this ring, you speak with the voice of the house." The ring was gone. The scar remained. "The tribute system is ended," she said. "Effective now. Every person currently in tribute service in these territories is released. I will spend the next year making sure that release means something, that they have somewhere to go, that the villages they came from have been compensated, that the records are entered into law so this cannot be done again." She paused. "I need the support of this court to do that. I'm asking for it. Openly, without coercion." She waited. The first person to stand was not a lord. It was the young man near the back, the one who had asked about grain supply routes in Brannock's pack hall, who had been watching with those specific calculating eyes for the entire proceeding. He stood up and he said, "Ethvar," simply, and sat back down. Then a lord. then another. Casimir was very still. Soren Vale was not there. She had been right. They had arrived first. And Soren was still on the road. And by the time he arrived, the shape of the room would already be different. Not that it mattered anymore, quite. The room was already different. She watched Casimir Vale understand that. It took him a long moment. She did not look away. She owed him nothing, not even the mercy of looking away. And she stood with her spine straight, and her hand flat, and her name in the air of the hall, and she let him understand it fully. He sat down. Not in surrender. She wasn't expecting that, didn't want it. Had no use for a theatrical submission. He sat down the way a man sits when the thing he has been holding stops being holdable, the gradual slow descent of someone putting down weight. She breathed. The hall was not cheering. She hadn't wanted that. Courts that cheer are courts where people are performing for the new power, and she had not come here for performance. The hall was mostly quiet. The specific quality quiet that follows something real, when people are still absorbing what they've been witness to. She looked at Brannock. He was already looking at her. His expression was, she had named that look. She'd done it in the courtyard with the pear tree, by moonlight. She let herself read it fully now, without the press of the hand over the feeling, without the one thing at a time. The look of a man who had been very patient and was still being patient, and was in no hurry, because patience was not the same as distance. She looked at the tribute records on the table. 12,411 names. She looked at the 11 people from the lot, standing at the back of the hall they had never been meant to enter. She looked at Corvan, 15 years old, with his dark, serious eyes, standing beside Brice, who was standing beside Paris, who was standing beside the others, and they were all of them present in this room that had been built to exclude them, and they were watching. She put the heel of her hand flat on the table one more time. It was not a gesture anymore. It was just her hand. The days after were long and complicated and sometimes bleak, which was the truth of it that she had not romanticized, even in the planning. Transitions are not clean. Power does not transfer like water poured from one vessel to another. It seeps, and some of it is always lost. And the work of the weeks following Casimir's removal from the throne was not the work of triumph. It was the work of records and letters and decisions, and the specific, grinding labor of a woman learning, in real time, how to be a queen. She was 24 years old. She had been no one for 4 years. She made mistakes. Several, in the first weeks. She made them and corrected them, and did not treat them as catastrophes, because she had spent 4 years in a world where mistakes had catastrophic consequences, and had developed a finely calibrated sense for the difference between a genuine disaster and a recoverable error. Brannock stayed. He did not take up residence in the court. That was not what she needed from him there, and he seemed to understand this without being told. He returned to Verith Keep twice in the first month to manage his own territory's business, and both times she was. She noticed his absence in the way she'd noticed the absence of consistent food in the tribute years, as a specific presence of lack, a thing that registered because she had gotten used to having it. Both times he came back. Once he came back with Dagmar, who arrived with herbs and opinions and immediately began reorganizing the court kitchens with the authority of a woman who had decided this was her business now. Marisol did not tell him to stay. She did not have that word yet. She was working on it. She freed the tribute lot people first. Before anything else, before the formal transfer of legal authority, before the assemblies with the Southern Lords, the first official act she performed was issuing the writs of release for every person in Casimir's tribute records. 12,411 writs. She did not sign them all personally. The court had clerks for that, and she had Paris who had been giving the younger clerks quiet instruction for 2 weeks already. But she held the seal for the first dozen. Her mother's seal, retrieved from the palace vault, where Casimir had locked the old royal effects with the specific contempt of a man who hadn't thought he'd need to worry about the old royal effects ever again. The seal was heavier than she remembered. She pressed it into the wax and held it there and thought, 12,411. She would not let that number become abstract. She was going to carry it the way she'd carried the tribute years. Not as a wound, but as a fact, a specific weight, a thing that had the right mass and should not be made lighter than it was. Corvin had gone home to his village in the second week. He came back in the third week with his sister, who was 12 and serious, and had apparently walked 40 miles to arrive here, because Corvin had sent a letter saying there was work and she should come. She attached herself to the court kitchens within a day and seemed perfectly comfortable about it. Corvan had the look of a boy who had accomplished something he'd intended. She'll be fine, he told Marisol, unnecessarily, with the confidence of a 15-year-old who has decided things. I know, Marisol said. He had been thinking about what work he wanted to do in the new arrangement. He was thinking, he told her with the specific seriousness of someone who had been carrying the thought for weeks about the schools. The ones that had been taxed closed, the ones Paris had taught in. I want to help rebuild them, he said. I'm not asking for a position, I just want to know if there's a way to do it. She looked at him. There's a way, she said. He nodded, accepting it as a fact. She had noticed this about him. He accepted things as facts when she said them without needing them elaborated, which was the quality of someone who trusted. She did not take it lightly. She had no intention of taking it lightly. In the fourth week, Brannock found her in what had been the palace's east tower. She had gone there without thinking about it, or thinking about it so little that it had been a body decision rather than a mind one. The old pull, the place where she had lain with her mother counting stars. She was sitting on the tower parapet with her back to the cold stone, and her face to the sky, which was clear tonight, the whole winter array of it spread above her, and she had been there for an hour before she heard his footsteps on the stairs. He came out onto the tower and stopped. She looked up at him. He looked at her and then at the sky. Aldrich family used this tower, he said, not a question. He had been learning the palace's history from the staff. She'd noticed quiet questions, the same methodical intelligence gathering he brought to everything. My mother called the constellations by their old names up here, she said. I used to think she was teaching me about stars. I think she was teaching me about memory. About keeping things. He came and sat beside her. Close, the space between them had been diminishing, deliberately and mutually, over a month, and tonight she had not maintained any of it. He was warm and solid and present, and the pine and cold water scent of him was so familiar to her now that she could not remember a time before she knew it. Tell me the names, he said. She looked up. Found them, the familiar shapes, the ones her mother had pointed at with her whole hand, not a single finger. She named them. The old names, the ones that were older than the kingdom, and had been kept by the people who'd been here before there was a kingdom to keep them for. She told him what they were supposed to be. Not the formal constellation shapes, the simplified things, but the older stories, the ones her mother had told. That one was a woman walking, not a bear. That one was two rivers meeting. That one had no name in any language her mother knew, and had been called simply the listening one, because someone had looked at it long ago and seen something listening. He was quiet through all of it. She felt him listening the way she'd felt him patient, the full quality of it, nothing held back. The listening one, he said, when she'd finished. The one with no name. It should have a name. My mother thought so. She never found one that fit. A silence, not empty. The opposite. Marisol, he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the star, the one with no name. I've been patient, he said, with no self-pity in it. Just a statement. Because you needed the space. And I would continue to be patient. I want you to know that. He looked at her then, But I want you to also know that I would like to stop being patient at some point when you're ready, and I'm telling you that because you told me you needed to know what I want." She held that for a moment. "What does not patient look like?" she asked. "For a start," he said, "I'd like to stop sitting on this side of a space you haven't asked me to close." She looked at him. She looked at the scar through his eyebrow, and the broken nose healed left of center, and the dark eyes that had read her in a market square, and closed her fist around her secret and waited, patiently, for everything that came after. She closed the space. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, her shoulder against his, her head ting slightly, the warmth of him coming all the way in, no wall, nothing held back, the heel of her hand no longer pressing anything flat because the feeling was allowed to be what it was, and what it was simply his. He put his arm around her. They sat like that for a long time, under the listening star. And she named a few more constellations when she thought of them, and he listened, and the palace was quiet below them, with the specific quality of quiet that follows a long noise finally ended. She thought, "I'm here," not as a survival statement, not the grim determined "I'm still here" of the tribute years, the daily accounting of continued breath. Just here, in this place, in this life. Present in it, wanting it, the wanting not sealed or pressed flat but fully available, the whole thing, the weight and the brightness of it both. She turned her head slightly. She could feel him breathe. "One more thing," she said. "Tell me." "The listening star," she said. "I want to name it." "What will you call it?" she thought. She looked at the star, steady, very clear, the kind of light that had been traveling a long time to arrive. "Alive," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "That's a good name," he said. She pressed her face against his shoulder. He turned his head and put his mouth against her hair, the most careful, specific pressure, and neither of them said anything after that. And the sky turned and the stars moved the way they always move, slowly, by long arcs, covering great distances without hurry, arriving where they were always going. In the morning, she came down from the tower and went to the kitchens, where Dagmar had already begun. And Corvin's sister was already there, and Breeze was at the herbs with the concentrated expression of a woman who had decided what she wanted to do with her hands. And Paris was in the hall with 3 young clerks, and his very particular brand of patient instruction, and the light was coming in off the hills in long gold bars, and the sound of the palace beginning its day was a sound she had not heard for 4 years and was learning to hear again. She stood in the kitchen doorway. Dagmar handed her something hot without looking up. "Eat," Dagmar said. She ate. Outside, the winter morning was clear and cold, and the sun was on the stones of the courtyard, and the tribute wagons that had come and gone for 9 years on these roads were not going. The roads were quiet in the way. Roads are quiet when the thing they were used for is over. She thought about the 12,000 names. She thought about the schools. She thought about Corvin's village with its gap where the school had been, and the girl who had walked 40 miles because her brother sent a letter saying there was work. She thought about Breeze, who had asked the right question. "Can I trust this place?" and had been given not an answer but a locked door and 3 weeks to find the answer herself. She thought about what it had taken to find it. She thought about her mother on the tower, pointing upward. "Keep things." She looked down at her left hand. The scar. The phantom weight of the ring that had been cut away, the ring she had spent 4 years closing her fist around. She looked at the scar in the morning light, out in the open, not hidden, not folded inside a fist, just there, part of her hand, part of the story of her hand. She was 24 years old. She had been no one for 4 years. She was no longer no one. She did not have a word yet for what she was instead, not queen, not yet. That a process, a work, a thing she was building with records and writs and small daily decisions. Not Brannock's, not yet. That was a space she was stepping into with care and willingness and the full weight of her wanting. Not the girl she'd been at 20 that was gone. Something new. Something that was made of all of it. The survival and the grief and the 4 years, and the knife and the pear tree and the star, with no name and the 12,000 people, and the boy who wanted to rebuild schools and the woman who asked the right question, and the old man who said, "I knew your mother's eyes," something that was hers. The morning was very clear. The sun was on the stones. Somewhere in the keep, someone had begun to sing. A low, carrying sound, one of the work songs she'd been hearing in the kitchen, the kind of song that doesn't need an occasion. She held her left hand up. Scar turned to the light, and she stood there in the kitchen doorway and breathed, and the breathing was not the careful inventory of survival. It was something else. It was the breathing of a woman who was present in her life and meant to stay. And if you stayed for this story, if you walked through every step of it with Marisol, from the dirt of the tribute block to the stars above an old tower, then you already know something about what it costs to be seen and what it gives back when you finally let it happen. That's the thing about stories like this. We don't come to them for the crown. We come to them for the moment before the crown, when one person looks at another and sees them all the way through and doesn't look away. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. Tales of hidden bloodlines and wolves who bow before they speak, of women who survived impossible things and came back for more than survival. Come back whenever you need to remember what it feels like to be found.